Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Eugene Morning Hustle podcast. This morning, we have Sarah Koski joining us for a part 2 of the work that she's doing with the homeless.
It's going to be great. We're going to pick up where we left off on the last episode, and we're also going to hear some success stories about what's happening in the homeless community, and also her work with LTD, and what can we do as a community to actually make a difference, right? Is it giving that dollar, or is it an orange? Stick around and find out. What's up, Eugene? You're listening to the Eugene Morning Hustle podcast, brought to you by the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. We're your hosts, Brandon Miller and Ivan Torres, and like us, we know you'd like to know what's going on in your city, socially, economically, civically, and culturally. From events to guest interviews and professional and personal development tips, each week we bring you stories of local business owners, advocates, leaders, and everyday Eugenians sharing how they've strengthened their roots to reach a little deeper in our community, and how you can too. Sarah, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So we want to take a little step back to what we were talking about on the last episode, which was all about, kind of us as the public and kind of how we view homelessness and how we see people on the streets and we lock eyes with them and we feel, those vulnerable feelings of like, well, what can I really do to help? Is that dollar going to actually make a difference, or is there more that we can do, or something more effective that we can do? What do you think?
So many different things.
Yeah.
So many different things. So this week, coming into this weekend, we're going to be experiencing triple-digit weather. So 100 degrees plus. It's not easy for folks on the street. And so a lot of things, I ride public transportation now, but when I had my truck, I literally got a styrofoam container, filled it with ice, and then had put water in my freezer the night before. And so every time I drove by someone that I saw in the corner, I would roll down the window and be like, hey, do you want a water bottle full of ice? It could either melt in their hands, they could use it as a means to cool, put it on the back of their neck to cool down, or wait till it melts a little bit and then they could drink it and hydrate. And I think that when we look at our day-to-day lives, we have to think about, what is it in my life that I could really use right now? Like for me, I need snack packs. If I don't eat, I am so grumpy in meetings, or I just get really quiet, right? And so even thinking about little packs of trail mix, or one thing that I carry in my backpack almost every day is the mini oranges, because in this town, something that's really, really highly requested is vitamin C. You think about allergies or all of these different things, even honey sticks. So folks who use substances typically, either if they don't have a substance where they continue that use, or they're in between hits, and this is a really hard conversation to have, because there's a lot of folks who are judgmental with folks who use substances, whether it's like heroin, fentanyl, meth, or even prescription pills, right? But if you think about the opiates, there is a lack of saliva that gets created. So any type of hard candy, just to revive that saliva in your mouth, the sweetness can really actually help you if you're looking to potentially kind of disconnect from those different types of substances. So after Halloween or after Christmas or Valentine's Day, I go in the candy aisle when it's half off and I buy as much hard candy as I can. Mints aren't necessarily the things that are most requested, but it's just something sweet in the mouth, water, packs, apples, oranges, different things like that are huge requests. It's really interesting when you think about, communities that we have here in town. Every community is different and every neighborhood is different. So one time I got really bold and I was working at the shelter because I had a lot of requests in my DMs of like, what do we do? How do we help the homeless? I was like, oh, well, I'll do some fun little tutorial posts. And I did this post of like, hey, our tribe here in town loves trail mix and they love oranges. So I was like, hey, carry some oranges. And then I got these messages from folks in Seattle and California who were working in social services, and they're like, trail mix and oranges are the worst idea. But what they were doing was they were coming from their community where there was an oversaturation of snacks being handed out in the community. Here there weren't. And so when we really look and assess how we can help the unhoused, what it really means is, how can we be neighborly? So, okay, maybe in my area, there's not a lot of tree covering. So I see folks outside. Maybe I go to the dollar store and get some sunblock and hand out sunblocks or make little kits, right? Maybe there is a disproportionate amount of females, and I'm a female, or whether or not you feel comfortable, but period poverty is alive and well right now. And female sanitation, whether if you as a man are not comfortable with tampons and pads, wipes or anything to keep clean, little bars of soap, water, things like that can really help when it comes to healthcare and hygiene. Oral hygiene is a huge thing. I mean, how do you take care of, we're just so used to going to the dentist. We're so used to going to the dentist that we don't want to go to the dentist, right? We kick and scream, oh, I don't. Well, tell that to someone who hasn't been to the dentist in 10 years that could really use some help working on their teeth, right? And so as we think about care packs, a care pack in Seattle is going to look different than a care pack in New York City. And a care pack in New York City is going to look different than a care pack in the South. What is it? So the things to assess. What's the temperature of the day? What's the typical community that I'm going to be seeing? Are they youth? Is it something that where youth might need this compared to that? Are they elderly? Even, if you feel comfortable, be like, if there's someone that you see all the time, right? Like if there's someone in your neighborhood who's camped, maybe you like the fact that they're camped there, maybe you don't. But nothing says that you can't go and be like, hey, I live a few blocks down, just checking on you. Is there something that you need? Even that conversation is really impactful, because then you start building out your own personal lived experience of what it means to have this relationship with someone who's out on the streets. Ziploc bags are a huge thing. Trash bags are a huge thing. I had a conversation with a gentleman the other day who, the reason why he's my friend is he has one of the biggest hearts in town, right? That's the reason why I like him. And he made just this statement the other day that really surprised me, because it didn't express the heart that I thought he had, right? Because we were driving past an unsanctioned homeless encampment, and there was a lot of trash around, and he's like, man, they're just so dirty. They're just so dirty. This whole homeless crisis there, I know you're working on it, but God, it really plagues this community of all the filth, right? Okay. Interesting. He's very visual, so he saw visually a representation of just trash spewed everywhere, right? Well, the next question is, if that individual were to put all of that trash in bags, where could they dispose of those bags? Really, where does the trash go? And there are agencies and organizations right now who are leading in trash collecting. So they have programs now where unhoused can get a specific bag, they have protective equipment on their hands, and then they clean up areas, and then they get $2 per bag for every trash. And then the trash then is put in a van or, like a big truck, and then that truck is taken to Santa Pack or, the dump. Because, honestly, okay, we talked about it again. The last podcast, it may not be the safest thing in the world, but I love walking the train tracks and I love walking the alleyways, because it really grounds me, because I can be in these conversations of significant privilege, and I can have all these really cool opportunities like a podcast like this, right? And it gravitates me more to the realm of normalcy of what the normal day-to-day is. So sometimes I'll just literally take a time on my lunch and go walk the alleyways, or go walk somewhere where I can feel a little bit more grounded in the community that I serve. And I cannot begin to tell you how many camps that have been abandoned, whether it was, they got swept, or someone, there's a lot of single females where something will happen, they don't feel safe, and they just have to get up and go. And the amount of belongings that they leave behind is tragic, right? But you see that they tried in every way, shape, or form to put those belongings in a bag and not have their belongings just spewed out everywhere. The amount of trash bags that are already collected and just left or abandoned because they either had to move, they were transitional in the first place, a little bit nomadic, anything like this. But it wasn't their intention to litter. It just was, they didn't have the systems set up. Something that was really interesting back right after the pandemic, Gabe, who is the founder of Everyone Village, there was a location on our way out to Veneta, and it was unofficially called the Thunderdome by the Eugene Police. And what it was a long strip of parking with a circular kind of roundabout where all these RVs were stationed, whether the RVs were working or not. And it was Thunderdome. There was a lot of things happening in that community that by law probably were illegal, right? But it was just a whole bunch of folks looking for a place to park their RVs. And Gabe had gone down there and kind of assessed the area. And what really had happened was there was an RV at the back of the area that caught on fire and just burned to the ground. I went and visited myself. Thank God no human lives were lost. There were some feline friends that were lost. But because of how the RVs were sitting, the fire truck couldn't get through, right? So they actually had to let it burn and watch it burn and just make sure that the embers didn't transfer into the lot next to it. But because of already some of the illicit activity going on, and not saying that crime equals homelessness, but just in that community, there were some things that were going on. The police and fire and first responders were understandably like, this is not safe. We can't have a whole bunch of humans here and not get accessible, like ambulances, fire trucks into this community. So they were marked to be moved. And what Gabe did was he basically bought a trash dumpster and said, hey, let's work with the city. Instead of just having everybody get out and go, what if we actually started looking at what community means? And so he got the dumpster, and what he saw was the community already had a hierarchy of leaders, helpers, as in every friend group or any family member, everybody has kind of their role, right? People were picking up their trash, they were collecting because there was a receptacle. And so it was almost an opportunity. There was this huge pizza party of like, hey, look at what we did. Look at how much we were able to clean. And because the local businesses, the first responders, the police saw that there was an actual dedicated collective impact to improving that area, there was a lot more case management that was allowed to come in. Folks were actually placed in safe sleep sites instead of just swept, because people saw the humanity and the change of people wanting to work together to get better. And so these conversations of, okay, my friend, going back to my friend, man, all I see is trash. Well, I asked him, I was like, show me a place in 2-mile radius of this location that he could put his trash in. And the friend was like, shoot, man, I didn't think about that. And I was like, yeah, neither did I until I started working at the shelter. And so we had this really cool conversation. I was like, all right, narrative Sarah, I won the narrative, opportunity there, right? So second day, I'm working on a project with him. We drive down the same route. Now I'm thinking he might have a little bit more compassion quotient for this gentleman, right? Same point in where we reach, he goes, oh man, look at all that trash, right? Because he's visual, right? And so, okay, we had this conversation, we had this meaning connection, and then again, visual, he just sees all this trash. He goes back to what he knows, right? Trash equals bad. So he looked at me, he goes, I know what you said. I know that we should have systems in place, but just look at this, look at my community. I wish my community was beautiful, and this is not making a beautiful community, right? And I said, I understand. I go, if you think about all of your friends and all of your friends who are housed, how many houses do they let you in? And how many people do you think have dining room table countertops, kitchens that are messy, sinks that are unclean, trash spewed? I mean, how many times do I just go and try and pick out an outfit and take 10 outfits and just throw them on the floor before I leave, right? I said, what we're witnessing is someone who is in their house that we can look into. I go, what about your house? If I went into your house today, would you be proud of the house that you presented to me? Because I mean, a lot of people have reception rooms, right? They have a really nice clean room where they take all their friends, or like me, I deep clean everything and you only get to come over to my house once a year, right? But what we're doing is, especially with the unhoused, and reshifting our focus, and that's really what got him, was, gosh, I'm looking at his bedroom, his kitchen, his bathroom. I mean, not necessarily bathroom, but where he brushes his teeth, where he puts on his deodorant if he has it, all of these different things. And all of that and all of his belongings are in this one collective area with no trash cans. I mean, how many bags of trash do we take out a week on average at our own house?
3 or 4, actually probably more.
Right. And I'm a hoarder, so I'm always bringing things. I always find cute little tokens of stuff, and then, I'm like, oh man, I gotta let that go, right? So I mean, I should probably have 5 or 6 or 7 a week, right? But it's just something to think about, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, even bags or zippy locks. So if you give someone some oranges or some apples, the amount of things that folks repurpose. And this was actually really heartbreaking when I was, starting my work at LTD. So 8 months ago, I was contracted with LTD to be Community Resource Liaison. And one of the first things that we had to look at was what can and cannot be on the bus. And we had meetings with public safety, supervisors, our director of operations, like all of the big chiefs of all of the different divisions. Now, mind you, I did not realize that LTD is like practically a mini city in this district, right? I mean, 300 plus employed, people from all over, all these different regions, rural, city, liberal, conservative, all of this. So there was a lot of talk of bringing back the safety restrictions back to pre-COVID era, because during COVID, LTD was doing a lot of experiments of can we allow riders to ride for free during this time? Loosening what can and cannot be brought on a bus. Large wagons, extra kind of wagons attached to bicycles, all these different things. And what they realized was, as much as they wanted to have a charitable heart and let everybody on, there was some real strong safety concerns, because what if the bus hit the brakes and all of that now became projectiles, right? Or maybe you're standing with your bike because you don't want your bike to fall over because there's like all these extended wagons. Well, what if something happens, you trip, and now you are like under your bike with all of this heavy equipment. And the biggest thing for me is bottles and cans, because I saw in the shelter that bottles and cans, it's not just someone diving into a trash can to pick up a bottle of LaCroix, right? That's workforce development. And, I've talked to Ashley Espinoza about this. I've talked to Sylvia Kidder-Bearer here at the Chamber about this, that canning and gleaning is actually one of the first steps to being employable, because it's one of the ways that you are getting in a routine to get cash, to be able to like work into another, position or job. And so I'm a huge advocate of the Oregon bottle drop. Oregon is really incredible, because when the bottle drop came into play, I mean, there's so many incredible stories of how we ended up having our bottle redemption. But right now in the state of Oregon, 90% of all bottles and cans are recycled and returned, right? That's astronomical. You don't see that anywhere else in the nation, right? And a lot of that has to do with our folks experiencing poverty, who are the ones supporting this initiative. I mean, it's so sustainable, so pro-eco, everything that you could imagine. But when it comes to bringing these on the bus, now going back to where you're staying as your home, unlike me, who has, e-web and an unlimited source of water, right? Like, I can go and have a shower and a bath and just sit in there for half an hour and not have to worry about it, right? I have access to clean water, have as much water as I want. I can just sit and basically allow water to just fall on and not have to worry about it. I don't have to hike to go get water. I don't have to boil my water because it's not safe, all of these different things. And I also have a kitchen sink where I can wash out my bottles and cans. And so if you think about cans that might have like alcohol in them or have been left out in the sun for a while, they get a little stinky, and, there might be some liquid in the bottom. So what we found at LTD is bottles and cans, as much as we wanted to support workforce development, I did not realize when it came to the bus the amount of lingering, the smell, smells linger in buses. So you get one big batch of cans that are really bad, the cans knock over, they leak onto the floor. Number one, it's a sliding hazard, right? And number two, that smell can be so like obscene, unfortunately, that bus now has to go out of commission. They have to replace it with another bus. Then they have to have folks go and clean it. In fact, I'm actually spending a whole night in July working overnight in our fleet. I'm so excited about this, my dear. Talk about experiential learning. I'll never, ever quit. But I'll be working with our fleet where when the buses come in, what does it mean to clean the bus? You know, what mechanics have to take place overnight while all of us are sleeping? There's a whole group of employees going and fixing the bus, doing all this. And I'm going to spend a day with them, and I'm going to go work with the cleaners and really hear what they have to say about bottles and cans, because, man, I will fight tooth and nail to see how many we can get on a bus. But again, as with every society, our society is only as good and supportive as when we rally together. And what is the community town square, and what is the town square saying? And if we're all on the same page saying the same thing, how do we know how to adjust for change, right? There always has to be kind of a contrarian in the room. Now, while I was advocating, workforce development, we got to support bottles and cans, there were these other voices saying, Sarah, you don't understand what it means to have to take a bus out of commission. You don't understand when some of these bags come in and that they leak, how hard it is for people to walk on without slipping. So now, while I have this position and I'm holding my flag as hard as I can on this hill, I'm hearing other sides where I'm like, oh man, I kind of get that. That does make sense, And that's where, when you have two positions, you can come together and make compromise. And I think that that's what we really have to focus on when it comes to the unhoused. Is we have all of these individual people who love the unhoused, or they love the business community in downtown, and we can all agree that, the reason why we're here is pretty much we love Eugene or what Eugene represents. But potentially we're all willing to die on our own hills without coming together, coming down into the valley and being like, okay, how do we make compromise? So this compromise happened. We had to do the safety policies, but canning and gleaning to me it's so important. And LTD did a lot of work for how do we readjust in looking at ways of accessibility, because we talked about before, 2 bottles and cans equals about a day's living, right? And so again, going back to Gabe and Everyone Village, we are now working on a brand new project where instead of people going onto the bus to the bottle drop, we bring the bus to them. And so we have a new bus that's been donated by First Baptist Church. We are working with Oregon Bottle Drop, who has already given us a seed grant of $25,000. LTD is looking at ways of transportation. I'm leading a whole crowd mapping project of looking at different sites that we could go in the area. Not just from Everyone Village. We did our first mapping project. We're going to go to the bottle drop, go where the people are, and have them circle on big maps where we should have this bus, our driver operators, and we're going to get a whole group of people, do the map overlay, and really take it to the streets and see what we can do to improve. But looping back, what this really means is, what can we do for a community, right? What can we do? On a microscopic level, on a day-to-day level, you could hand out an orange. You could hand out a cold water bottle. When it's hot, I know someone who walks around with a little wagon full of soup and then hands out soup in little coffee containers, right? There's so many things that we can do, but it's just, if you have someone who knows they like beading, right? Make some beads. Hand out beads to people on the street. I did this one. I had this really great day with dandelion flowers. I had actually asked to have a corsage made, and it was for the day that I was winning Woman of the Year for the state of Oregon, and I wanted to have some flowers, right? And they're like, hey, what are you doing today? And I was like, oh, I'm going to go walk Washington Jefferson Park, kind of go hang out with my people. And she's like, people? What people? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you, right? Open door to talk about my love. She's like, oh, and she's like, hold on just a second. And she runs in the back, and she comes back out with a whole bunch of red roses and like daisies. She goes, tell them I love them. Here. So I came with this like a whole armful of flowers, and every time I saw someone who just looked like they were having a hard day, housed or not, I just was like, hey, you're loved. Give them a flower. We had tears, we had hugs, we had like this reconciling of humanity where people were like, can I hug you? Of course you can hug me, and this human interaction, this human contact. And the most powerful moment out of all of this, and talking about the great exchange of haves and have-nots, I had this really, really beautiful rose, and I saw this woman walking an alleyway, and I was like, hey, ma'am, I was like, can I give you a rose? And she goes, well, I think so, right? And she came up to me and she grabbed a rose and she goes, a flower for a flower. And she had found this little wildflower and she was holding it in her hand and just kind of caressing it. And because I had exchanged something that I had, she had exchanged something she had, and she gave me her wildflower, right? And it's those human connections that we really, really miss. But it's also when we look at ways of supporting the unhoused, there's these human interactions that really wake you up to the fact that we've been so cauterized. Like our heart has been cauterized to just be in our own lane. Take care of our four and no more, right? Like I need to advance in my career. I need to get the best schooling for my kid, all of this. And it's not bad, right? And there's so many new concepts of what the American dream is nowadays, because as we transition from, myself as a millennial, the younger populations looking at, more anti-capitalistic stances, right? Pro-socialist stances. The things that are talking about in the generations coming up from below me to the things that were talked about to my grandpa, who was a World War II vet. I mean, there's all of these different ideas and all of these different types of causes that people want to support. But at the end of the day, we all bleed the same color, right? We all have a heartbeat. We're all grasping for the same air. And so to say, what can we do for the unhoused is just really, how can a human support a human?
I never had thought about all those different obstacles, like not having the trash bags, not having a place to drop off the trash bags, or having your whole home opened up and everyone can see it. I mean, I can tell you very confidently, I have laundry that is all over my closet floor right now. I would not be proud to show that to anybody. And so I can absolutely relate to that. I think a lot of us can. Yeah. But when we look at those moments of humanity, where we're taking care of our fellow man, and it's not about class, it's about humanity, right? Because the views out there are still prevalent where it's like, well, you're just contributing to the problem. If you give that orange, that's contributing to the problem. If you're giving that $1, you're contributing to the problem. If you're trying to support them and maintain their lifestyle, they're just going to stay in that lifestyle because they're not going to want to do anything different with their life, right? Because you're enabling them. What message do you have for folks that have that mindset? And I think we're starting to unravel some of that right now, but what would you say to them to say, hey, you might want to look at it a little differently, and here's why?
It's really tough because, when you think about building all your cultural norms and cultural constructs for years and years and years and years, you're not going to have a single conversation and just be like, aha, right? Maybe if you have a faith encounter, right? So many people have a faith encounter and they're like, well, gosh, I want to clean up my life, right? But it is not going to be immediate, right? We have this saying in our church, right? If you rob a bank, right? And you are fleeing from the steps of the bank and you break your leg, and before the police officer catches you, you say, God, take me, I want to be saved. You're still going to have a broken leg and you're still going to have to go and face some prison time, right? Like, salvation or whatever, that mindset change is great, but there's going to be having corresponding actions after that mindset change to be implemented. And so to grapple with this construct of how do we change our minds, it really has to be, there's a lot of things to think about. Is there someone in your family experiencing this? Is it causing stress to you and your own household? Could that be the impetus of why you're so frustrated with the unhoused, right? Because it's triggering something in you and your past and your family. Are you responding to something that you see because you're a visual learner? Are you responding to something because of something someone told you? Like, you even think about racism. How many children didn't like a certain color of skin because their father and their father's father told them that, right? And so how do you break that down? You just really have to have a moment of clarity. Once you have that moment of clarity, you have to want to make that internal change. And so I'm not saying that it's easy. It's something that I had to do myself, as we joked with me and my little pocket knife in my wallet, right? I had to realize, not everybody was going to try and rob me or assault me or rape me or, people are all drugged out, like with open drugs everywhere. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I was scared going into that shelter. And maybe that's controversial to say for a lot of people. A lot of people are like, well, you should just know that humanity is humanity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I was a woman with a past where I had been assaulted in my past, and I was really concerned about some things, right? Only to learn that there was a lot of things that I could do on my end and a lot of things that I could learn on my end to dispel some of these rumors, some of these cultural norms, all of that. That question is so huge. But what I think that we really need to look at in our own community is, if this were my son or daughter, if this were me, what would I need? Like, I have a friend who's currently unhoused, and he goes, what's the number one addiction in town? And I was trying to think about it, and I'm like, well, fentanyl, maybe pornography, I don't know, right? And he goes, your cell phone.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
He goes, it's your cell phone. He goes, because that's okay to be addicted to. We're all cool, right? But you see someone with a needle in their arm, all of a sudden it's not okay. Is addiction addiction? Well, what makes this addiction so much more worse than that addiction? Because we were told that it is. Because maybe crime happens because someone's trying to, I may not commit a crime because I'm addicted to my cell phone. I may not commit a crime because I'm addicted to Monster energy drinks. You never know, right? Maybe, so again, there's a whole spectrum, and I'm not putting everything just in a single box. But what he said was, I wish that police officers and county commissioners and city council members could go and live a day in our shoes. And this would be the only two things I would ask of them. Number one, try and find a place to charge your phone without being shooed away, right? And not in their role, right? As a homeless person, try and find a place that you could charge your phone without being shooed away. He goes, it's not going to happen. How do I contact the people I need to contact? How do I call for safety? How do I call for help if I can't even access electricity, right? And a second thing was, good luck trying to find a bathroom. You want our downtown to be vibrant and beautiful and all of these different things. Well, give humans the means to be able to relieve themselves in a way that's safe, And he said, if you were just to go around town and try and find a charging station without having to pay, right? A coffee or something like that. Or even if you do, because you look like you might be from outside. No, granted, there's a couple times where I look like that, right? Like, I don't want to be seen. I'll walk into Walmart with the beanie and some sweatpants, and I'm raggedy, right? But how many times, subconsciously or consciously, do we dress up when we want to apply for a loan or get a bank account? How many times do we dress up when we're looking for, like a new home or trying to buy a car? We, as humans with means, do a lot to present ourselves very meticulously when we want to impress people. You get invited to a gala at the country club, we're not going to wear what we're wearing right now. Why?
Absolutely.
Because there's all of this decorum that we've created in our own community. And so removing all decorum and now adding on personal bias, how do you get resources and help? And I think that that's one of the most clear signs for me is, we talk about AI and virtual reality and traveling to different countries when it comes to virtual reality. Well, what if we just had some virtual reality that just showed the life of a day of a homeless, like getting shooed away,
right.
being like, you can't be here, man, or even listening to the conversation. So another thing to loop back of what we can do, kind words don't cost anything, but they mean $1 million. You can't put money on, if you have a suicidal ideation, or if you're in a place where it seems like everything's going wrong and there's nothing that, you might make 2 steps forward and then you get knocked back 5 steps and you're just like really beating yourself up. And I'm not going to lie, the amount of like negative self-talk, for us in this day and age, let alone folks on the street, right? Just being like, have a great day. There was a woman that I knew who in her wallet carried little notes from like 20 years. She had got on like a card somewhere where it said, I love you. and she kept it in her wallet, and she would bring it out, and when she was in crisis or was like having like an anxiety attack, she would take out all these cards and reread them to herself. She's like, it's the only way that it stops the negative voices. And so there was a time in the shelter where I literally went and I would handwrite cards that just were like, I appreciate you today, like I hope you have a really great day, or like you're loved, and I would just slide them under the tents just to see. And the amount of reactions in a positive way was incredible. And so even being like, you know, like, or just a nod. I mean, I cannot begin to tell you the amount of times, like if you're a guy and you're like, I don't want to use that flowery language, you know, that's just saved for my wife, right? Like, right? Okay, you do you. But even just like I acknowledge that you exist is so compelling.
Right. And I think that hesitation is what we talked about on last episode. It's like, well, if I make the connection, then I'm inviting them to ask for money or help in some way, and I don't feel comfortable giving that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time when I was unemployed because, oh man, it was a time where I just kept hitting my head. I couldn't get it. Well, I would always get a job, right? Because I'm really smart and people like me. But I had a hard time with authority, right? Because there was some trauma in my past. So anytime authority figures would be coming to correct me, man, they got the business, right? So there was a season in my life where I really had to grow a lot. And in that season, I was poor. I was the one having to go return bottles and cans. Like I would like walk to houses of people in my church and be in those redemption sites in line. It was during the pandemic too, right before the pandemic. So I mean, I was holding those cans. I was walking to places trying to figure out how to get a job. And in that time, you know, folks who were asking for money, they'd be like, hey, you know, do you have any spare change? I'd be like, yo, bro, you have more than me right now. Like, you want to share some with me? Like, what you got? But just even making it kind of like a joke, or like, hey, man, I don't have it right now, but man, I wish you the best, right? I mean, that's so honest, right? Like, you know, like you don't even have to feel compelled to go down to Steel Supply and buy him a pizza. Just be like, no, I use tap pay. Like, I don't carry cash anymore. And they'll joke and be like, yeah, I get it. Well, have a good day, dude. Yeah, you too. Like, you don't have to, you know, and I think that like clenching the purse or like averting eyes was so triggering. I was on the bus one time and there was this woman who appeared like she was in crisis. I couldn't tell. I didn't want to make a judgment or anything. And she was sitting in the seat directly across the aisle from me. And I was just scrolling on my phone. Like I was off the clock, you know, I was going home. I was just happy to be relaxed. And it was almost like this Shakespearean monologue. And I was so glad I sat next to her because this was really early on in my career with LTD, but it changed the course of how I myself ended up doing my position, because she was speaking out loud, but it wasn't like she was just speaking like gibberish or like, you know, saying things that didn't make sense. She was so beautiful and so poised. And she said, gosh, I'm trying to remember how she said it. She said, you might not know this, but when I go home at night, I don't go home to a house. And when I don't go home to a house, I don't know if I go home to safety. And when I go home at night, I don't know if I will wake up, because I don't know if I will be trampled on or beaten or bruised or raped. And you can go home on this bus to your house and you can have your stories and you can create your legacy. But my legacy could be tonight I will die. And she was just so beautiful and so poetic. And she said, you might not be listening to me, but I have to get my story out. She goes, because if I don't say something today, my story dies with me. And she just kept on going like this the whole bus ride. And she said, my intention is one day someone will listen to what I have to say. Oh,
jeez.
I just was like, and the whole bus was quiet, right? She made, I mean, you couldn't have put that on the stage and wouldn't have been moved to tears, right? That would, I mean, you couldn't have put that in a movie and not been like incredible, right? And we all in this bus had this collective moment, and she got done with what she said, and not a single response back. And I just looked over at her and I didn't know what to do, right? And again, that's that conversation of you just don't know what to do in the moment sometimes, right? Like, do you let that lie and just sit with it for a moment? Do you say something? And again, here I am thinking that I kind of know what to do. I don't know what to do in that situation. And I looked over at her and I was like, I heard you. And she looked at me and she just, tears welled up in her eyes. And then a guy in front of me said, yeah, me too. And she goes, thank you. And that was it. That's all she needed. There was no forward conversation or like, let me share the trauma of my pain. It was just all I wanted for this very moment was someone to know that I don't feel safe living outdoors, that I fear for my life every single night, that if I were to die, and she said this in what she said, if I were to die tonight, no one would know. No one would know that I was gone. And again, that same gentleman that had taught me about, the chargers and, the bathrooms, he, and again, very cautious of saying that he's allowed me to share this story. He said, look, Sarah, every Monday I write a list of all of my friends. And every Monday night I go out on my bike and I go to all of these places and meet and hang out with my friends. And he goes, and every week I cross 2 or 3 names off that list, right? 2 or 3 names of folks that are gone, right? Every week. And I know that we have a lot of conversations where, and I'm the girl who wants to instill hope, right? I'm the utopist. I think that we can make changes, but we also have to address the reality of what's going on. So as we're looking at downtown and wanting to make downtown beautiful and not have it smell like urine or not, as a business leader, have someone sleeping on your front doorstep, right? I mean, there's these interesting, it's like a dance, right? This kind of interesting ebb and flow. But yet there's this reality of folks in the street who are losing friends left and right. And it's like, how do you even wake up and deal? If you lost 2 friends a week, would you want to wake up? Would you want to try and put effort in to pull yourself up by the bootstraps? Would you want to hear the whispers on the bus when you sit down? You already know that you haven't showered in 5 days. You already know you're wearing the same clothes. Situational awareness. This is a really interesting conversation to have. I am always at a bus stop, right? Because I ride the bus. The amount of unhoused folks who will purposely stand downwind of me, about 10 meters away from me, so that I don't have to smell them. And then therefore, they don't have to hear the negative conversations of like, oh man, it stinks so much. Imagine being a human and you purposely, intentionally make the choice to stand away from another human because you're so embarrassed of how you smell or the fact that you can't access hygiene supplies. That's heartbreaking in and of itself, right? And so, the thing is just, can we be aware of the realities? That the realities of, oh man, they stink. Yeah, they do. Because they can't find a shower. Or, they go somewhere and have a shower and maybe something went wrong. Or maybe they have a hurting leg and they can't get somewhere. Or they don't have a bus token. Or something didn't work out that day. But man, how would we be? Again, bringing that back to our own personal, if I didn't shower for 5 days and if I wore the same clothes and slept in them and was outdoors and sweated in them and it's 100-degree temperature, do you think I would look presentable to go to a chamber meeting? Like, how do you think people would receive me if my hair wasn't washed, my clothes weren't clean, and I had no access to deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrush, but yet I have something to say, right? And so, I think it's just a really incredible opportunity for us to just be really grounded. And as we look at like ways to ground ourselves, and not escape into this fantasy that either we have to just sweep them all away or we have to do everything we can to, it's strange. It's like we as a community are never going to be this co-op commune where everybody is just going to all, like, we're frolicking in the woods with like butterflies and rainbows and ribbons. That's not a reality. But the reality of let's put everybody in these indoor settings, let's get them all out of sight, that's not a reality either. I mean, that has so many implications, and especially as we talked about the new Supreme Court ruling of Johnson v. Grants Pass, I mean, people are already scared. Frontline responders and case managers are scared, right? Humans on the street are scared. And so it's like, what can we do to just kind of all just be like, all right, we're going to get through this together.
Wow.
That's really amazing. It really, you have brought so many, I mean, just such a good perception. And I mean, just even opening up your eyes, the whole garbage thing, the charging your phones, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things that I had never even thought about. And I think that's, one of the things that adds to that problem is just not being able to see what others are in so much need of, or small things that would make a huge difference to them. So
yeah, and you are making progress in the community with some of these solutions, right, and these resources. And I know we had talked earlier that you got a very important talk coming up, but it's not just a talk. Can you share about that?
I'm so excited. I can't even hold it in. So in October, I will be going up to Washington, and I will be giving my first TED Talk.
Wow,
so
it's huge.
It's incredible. This TED Talk it's a TEDx event. The theme is on resilience, and it's my heart. Resilience is my heart when it comes to unhoused. I'll be talking about disaster planning, and again, inclusion, right? What does it mean to do disaster planning for folks without a home, who might be migrant, who might be outdoors? They are subject to so much more of extreme weather. Even when we look at looking at minorities, BIPOC communities, indigenous communities, folks on the street, all of these, how are we as a community more inclusive in disaster planning, disaster mitigation, and disaster response? And so I'll be bringing in a lot of my experience when we did a lot of that work for the Lane County COAD, the McKinsey wildfire, and then also combining a very cool innovation technology called What 3 Words. And What 3 Words, I'll talk more about it in the coming days. I'm actually going to be doing some trainings with street responders here in Eugene. What 3 Words allows us to basically map and access folks who aren't on traditional maps of like Apple Maps, Google Maps, and get directly to them within like a 10-meter radius. And so what that means in times of disaster is someone needs some support, they need to be extracted. What 3 Words was incredible when it came to Afghanistan, and when we had, like friends and colleagues and all these things, American citizens and other citizens in rural areas where you can find them on a map. They just were like, hey, these are the 3 words of where I'm at, and responders could go directly. So critical health junctures, times of war, emergency response, folks who are hiking up mountains and then get stuck, responders can help there. But what we are going to be talking about, and what I'm so excited to champion in this TED Talk, is how do we use innovation technology and the collaboration of emergency management to directly support folks on the street. It's going to be incredible.
Wow.
So excited.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And when are you going up there again?
October.
Yes. Nice. Okay.
So the tremors are starting, but we've been doing a lot of work unofficially in Eugene when it comes to What 3 Words. But what I want to do is show how well this project's been doing here. Most of what I do, it's not to show, hey, look at what I can do. It's just to get the job done, right? But what I want to share is that this is really successful, that we can replicate this, that other communities, other towns, other municipalities can use this incredible free feature to support folks in crisis. And especially when it comes to our own disaster planning, I mean, most disaster planning is centered around the fact that you have a house and that you have a way to get out and you have potentially a vehicle or something like that. I mean, you're not going to technically see a Red Cross guide that says, hey, you're out on the streets, here's how to prepare, right? Because they're assuming that, I mean, you're on your own, buddy, right? And so my biggest goal as we look toward the future is how can disaster planning, work, and management be all inclusive?
Wow.
How does what 3 words work?
Oh my gosh. Don't get me started. That's the opportunity for another podcast. I could go hours for how much I love what 3 words. Started in London. The founders were working in conferences, sound and audio. And if you look at convention centers, right, there's like dozens of doors that you can deliver to, especially when setting up for conventions. What they realized is when people gave directions on how to get to the convention center, they didn't necessarily know what door was needed to drop off the audio equipment. And so they created this grid of the world that is 10 by 10 meter increments. And every square is assigned 3 words. So for example, cat, sword, cereal. If you say that you're sitting right now and that's cat, sword, cereal, I can input those 3 words into their feature, which connects to Google Maps or Apple Maps. And if I'm in Salem, it would direct me exactly to the square that you're on. So instead of saying, hey, we're here at the Chamber of Commerce and there's 2 doors and 2 access points, and I don't know if you're indoors or outdoors, and I need to get to you quickly, right? It will tell me exactly that you are inside in this room sitting in that chair. And so now think about
Pretty
that
incredible.
in the way of how we support the unhoused, who often have to have communities where they're hidden and out of sight as we talk about their homes. So say, it's a disaster or triple degree weather. How do we get water and electrolytes out to those folks? If there is a crisis and something goes down, or a wildfire, God forbid, or a fire at a camp, how do we get there quickly if they're just like, oh, well, I'm a couple miles down from the river, all of these different things, because it's not like there's roads that get directly to the Willamette River, right? Like it's not going to be, but what 3 words can get us in a region, what we see often, because it was London based, it was really adopted a lot more in the European circles. What we're seeing now is the integration and the adoption in the American community far more. So police departments are actually using it, first responders are using it, search and rescue are using it. My thing, and I don't know if a lot of people have publicly talked about what 3 words when it comes to the unhoused, but a great example is just recently Glastonbury, right? The big, where is that? Over in the UK, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the amount of people there, right? And they were like, you can use what 3 words to assign your tent of where you're staying. And I'm like, that's exactly what we're doing. But the privilege of a huge music festival, right? And camping and doing all that glamping. Yes, you can assign the what 3 word to where you're camping there, but why can't you do the same thing with a tent? Yeah. And so what we're doing is we're allowing this really cool piece of technology that, again, it's a for-profit company. So it's not saying that they're going to ever be perfect. We know what happens when there's corporations, right? But at this very moment, it is open to the community to use for free. It's accessible. What I can literally do is if someone's like, hey, I want you to come hang out with me at my camp, and it's someone that I know, and I give them a link. It says locate.what and the number 3 words.com, and it'll automatically pop up with the 3 words. So they don't have to navigate the grid. I mean, there's all sorts of things, advanced work, all of this, but it'll just pop up with the 3 words. So then I'll put the 3 words in my app, boom, I'm there, right? It's so cool.
Wow, that's cool.
So cool. So hopefully in the TED Talk, and again, my brain changes every minute. I'm a chameleon in my thoughts, right? And the fact that I get so passionate about all these different causes, but I really want to inspire others to support vulnerable communities when it comes to disaster, because look at the way that our weather's changing. I mean, look at how many times we're having triple degree weather. Look at the amount of, even the ice storm that we just recently had, and our Congresswoman Val Hoyle said it was an unprecedented storm that we weren't prepared for. Okay, if we're not prepared for an unprecedented ice storm, what happens if something more advanced than an unprecedented ice storm were to take place? How do we make sure that all of our people, not just the people with means or have practiced with their go bags, can get to a place of safety. You guys didn't even know, but I, on my sweatshirt, actually had a what 3 words address on the last sweatshirt.
Okay, so that's what that is.
/ and then 3 words.
Yes. Because
So-
we talked about that. We said we didn't get to what that message is on her shirt yet, but now it all kind of ties in. That's great.
I'm an only child and I have nothing to do with my life, so I like doing Easter eggs.
I love
so
that.
I was like a wearable Easter egg. Yeah.
That's so cool. So
where does it lead?
If you haven't seen that episode, go back and watch that episode so you can see that Easter egg.
Only on your Patreon.
Where does it lead?
Yeah, so right now I'm collecting images and examples of how to direct and navigate folks to different places. I've found some really unique, just freestanding things, right, on the train tracks where we can actually use that as examples, because I never want to use someone's own home or an individual. So this is this really cool, like a cement shelter is where it leads to. Yeah, I'll send you guys the 3 words,
Cool.
and then you can
That's
play
cool.
with it, and
Yeah.
you'll literally see what I marked as the thing.
Alrighty, everybody. So we're to the part of the show where we get to know our guests a little bit better. So Sarah, are you ready?
I'll do my best.
All right. So when you're not at work, how do you like to spend your time?
2 things. So I am a woman who has a very addictive personality, right? And I just jump in voraciously, as you can see how passionate I am with the unhoused. And so when I came to the University of Oregon, I learned what it was like to party, right? And so I was drinking like half a bottle of Jack Daniels every single night while still being top of my class and a presidential scholar and at the honors college. But I actually applied myself. Who knew what would happen, right? So on my off time, I do as much as I can in positive ways to stay clean and sober, honestly. I go to Bible studies. I have great friends. I have a system of checks and balances of, making positive strides, because sometimes my job's really stressful, or I'll hear like a really heartbreaking story or something triggers me of my past, and it's really tough. And so I think that, even in this conversation of what I like to do on my off time, I think allowing the freedom for individuals like me to even be honest and be like, sobriety really keeps me on the up and up. And being abstinent of substances and alcohol is something that I think I want to lead by example in saying that I don't go to the bars. I don't party. If I'm up late at night, it's at a Bible study, right? But that positive influence, the changing of my former toxic friends, having great friends around me, keeping really like a good routine after work has really kept me to the point where I can pour so much in service. And so I do a lot to pour back into myself, right? Like I do a lot of reading. I like to write. I love, foreign and independent movies. But I feel like I'm living on borrowed time, right? There was a point in my life after college that I didn't think I was going to make it. I was too afraid to be suicidal. So I put myself in a lot of situations where I was hoping to die. And I think that that's another conversation of why I love the unhoused so much, is because there's so many times where they're just like, man, I don't think I can make it, right? And not that I have that experience of being unhoused, but I know what it's like to feel abandoned, to have heartbreak, to have family members leave, to try and drink myself away, right? And now that I'm 11 years free of that, I can actually start dealing with the reality of my life and what it means to unpack all of that stuff from my past. And so life is good now. I just do a lot to be intentional to keep it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow.
What was your first career you dreamed of as a kid?
So many things. So I wanted to be an archaeologist.
Oh, wow. Cool.
I wanted to be a oceanographer. I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer. Yeah, those were like first grade aspirations,
Wow, yeah.
mind you. I mean, I have vivid memories of me and my first grade teacher looking up how to spell archaeologist in the dictionary, and I was like, "How do you not know? You're supposed to be my teacher." And I remember her being so upset. She's like, "I don't know everything," and I was like, "But but what was really cool is, my father was the cartographer for the Bureau of Land Management, and so there was a lot of like work on archaeology, and so I was meeting these archaeologists, and my parents didn't raise me as a traditional, unique kid. I mean, I was literally having National Geographics in my room instead of like children's books. Like, I wasn't watching cartoons. Video games weren't allowed. It was more conceptual of this is the world around you. They didn't have like hundreds of thousands of dollars to take me, all these places abroad, but what they wanted to do was give me a really cool worldly construct of what the world meant. So I was raised to want to explore. And so all of the jobs that I had until I got to about high school were all about exploration and being tactile. And I think that love of archaeology is really interesting in how it goes into my work with the unhoused, because I'll see an abandoned camp and it's almost like a really interesting collection of, are they male and female? Did they leave in a hurry? Did they not? And so I did some work with digital accessibility, a project, through the Technology Association of Oregon. The amount of like doctors' documents, voter registration cards, everything that are left in a camp, like crucial documents. And so I was actually working on a project of how to digitize those documents and put them in a digital vault that could always be accessible, like not password protected, but attached to some sort of biometric, like a fingerprint. So folks in the street, can I tell you the amount of photos that are left behind? Because those things are like lingering memories, and printed out photos are so vital, and the amount of photos that are just lost, right? And so I think that I've taken all of these really amazing things of what I wanted to do in the past, even the photography. I don't take photos of people, but of kind of like these lost, abandoned places, so that I've just started writing again, and I have a Substack. All of the images that I use in my Substack are all photos I've taken myself on my cell phone. And it's like, how do we experience? How do we tell those stories? How do we examine those stories in a way that can be palatable?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's really amazing. I was going to ask, what if you stuck with any of those throughout high school and even after?
There was this whole point in my life where I wanted to be a geneticist too. So much. I'm a woman in STEM. I love science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of that. And there was a point where I thought I was going to go to Oregon State and work with like the Human Genome Project or something like that. But my mother, who was a rehab counselor for the criminally insane, kept taking personality tests. And she's like, Sarah, you're way too social and you talk way too much to be all by yourself in a lab. Like, maybe we should transition to like kind of arts and humanities, which is how I ended up at U of O, because I was also writing poetry. So even as a young person or a student, I was winning awards for my writing and creative writing on a national level, like medals, all sorts of things. I was like presenting for the state up in Portland and doing all these different things. So the ways of how I communicated, my brain thinks a little bit different. I mean, we call it neurodivergent now, but I always said, my brain doesn't think like normal people. And how I had to express myself when I was growing up was through the creative arts, because I couldn't really like express what was going on or what was wrong with me. And so even as we look at the ways that we express ourselves when we interact with the unhoused or folks in crisis, it's always been through a creative lens for me, because that was what I knew how to do, because sometimes conversations are hard to have. Mm-hmm. But if we had this really cool photo of this woman giving me a wildflower, right? I mean, that spurs curiosity and exploration. And so, I mean, yes, I've used all of that in kind of the role that I'm in now.
What is your guilty pleasure?
Oh, oh gosh. I think escapism is my guilty pleasure.
Oh yeah, okay.
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that I think that we all have to have a place to kind of go and rest, especially in working in kind of such a interesting / traumatic field, right? But I just love going and exploring other culinary delights. I love all sorts of different international fare. High Street Tonics just opened up in town, and all of
Just
those,
talking about that.
zero proof cocktails, and party downtown with their oysters, and just going out and exploring. Or, my parents, again, with the National Geographics, they always had me at the Indie Film House in Salem. It was called Salem Cinema, because they used film as a way for me to explore the worlds in different countries. So I've continued that, right, of like international films, film festivals. If I wish I could just be a philanthropist and just do that for the rest of my life. But if we even had a film festival in Eugene, when it came to either films produced and created by the unhoused, or even documentaries about things that were going on. I mean, we have all sorts of different film festivals. Why couldn't we start shifting the narrative? Because how many times do we look at the homeless on screen and it's negative?
Yeah.
Why couldn't we have a festival like that where it's positive? So it's so that's kind of, it's fun to go out and kind of celebrate and explore, but I'm very autonomous. So if you ever see me all by myself, that's just what I'm doing. I'm just having my moment.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's actually the filmmaking community is now starting to rally and start to put something like that together, and hopefully to have a film festival of some sort. So hopefully that'd be a good connection to make. Yeah. So awesome. Should we close it out with this little fun question at the end?
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
All right. This is one of my favorite questions to ask. Okay, so what is a hidden gem in Eugene that you think, if somebody was to move here or visit and you're like, you have to check this place out? I mean, it could be a retail outlet, a restaurant, a park, an event, a historical site, something that you think would be like, oh, this is a hidden gem.
I have a place, but it's not there anymore.
Okay.
So the Schnitzer Museum of Art on campus is incredible. I mean, they have Jean-Michel Basquiat. The amount of touring expositions that they have there, I mean, it's world-class art that comes in, and it's right in our own backyard, right? And First Fridays, they make it accessible, open, and free. And, the Schnitzers have done a lot when it came to being a patron of the arts. You think about, like, historically, how much we need patronage of artists to be able to just be free to create and do all these different things. And so we don't have to go up to Portland to see beautiful world-class art here in Eugene.
Right.
I mean, it's literally on campus. There was this piece, and it's not there anymore, and I don't even know who painted it, but it was huge. It took up a whole wall, and there was a seat. And it was so interesting because it was a painting of a very wealthy family, and it was all of their family members, and it was like in this regal hall, and a portion of the painting was undone. Like, there was sketching of these young little girls in their beautiful, like, tufted dresses, and the kind of the byline of the piece was that the artist purposely left it undone because of the unraveling of the family. Or maybe that was what I told myself, but it was really fascinating because there's this huge grandiose portrait left undone, and it was like an incomplete family. And I used to go there and just stare at this painting for hours until practically the place would close, and then security would have to usher me out, because that's what I felt. I had an incomplete family, and this was a visual representation of what it meant to not be. People saw it and was like, oh, it's an unfinished painting. And to me, it was the perfect representation of how I existed in my life. And I think that is a really good analogy to kind of the work that we do in the street. There's this beautiful fresco of all of these people in a room, but yet there's a portion of that that's incomplete. And our role is, how do we as a community finish that painting? Do we leave it undone? Do we leave the sketch of the young girls as it is? Do we enjoy what we have right now? Or do we rally and finish the painting, right? And that's kind of like, how do we create our legacy is the biggest question. Like, what do I want my legacy to be? Well, I want to be happy, clean, and sober. I want to do service and excellence. I want to lead with a good heart. Am I going to always do that? No. I'm going to have grumpy days and frustrated days. But to me, I'm starting to create my own painting instead of a broken painting that's unfinished of my past. I'm starting to fill in where there wasn't paint there before. So that's my favorite place.
Wow, I tell you, that actually led into such a beautiful message for all of our viewers and listeners to be like, if there's something that you didn't take away here, that's the message right there, is to finish that painting, right? Well, we absolutely are thrilled to have had you here for part 2. And yes, we could have part 3, 4, 5, and 6 as well. So hopefully we can do a follow-up at some point and check in with you and see how things are going. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
So what changed your view of the homeless during this episode?
I think one of the biggest shock factors there for me was just something that I don't really think about. And I mean, even Sarah said that she hadn't thought about it until it was brought up. But I think it was the garbage, man.
Oh, yeah.
Really not having a place to take any garbage that you have, and it costing money to get rid of garbage. Well, how do we expect things to stay clean? Like I had never even thought of that. I think another thing is seeing inside of people's homes.
Right.
That I was like, oh man, I mean, that's totally true. Like, I'm guilty of that. Like, I have laundry laying out. I have dirty dishes that I didn't wash before running out of the house. And, my luxury is that mine gets to hide behind a wall and a door and nobody gets to see inside.
Right. And their camps are right there, right? They have their tent. They have their belongings. They don't have organizers or drawers or a dresser. They don't have a sink. They don't have any of that stuff. So that stuff hangs out there because they don't have access to trash bags, which brings up the other problem, which is, where are the receptacles to drop off a trash bag?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
For us, living in homes and all that, where do you go to do that? The dump.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's a clear across town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
So imagine not having that transportation and having to take this one trash bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, man, how do you?
And I would imagine you wouldn't want to get rid of that trash bag. You'd want to reuse it, right? So you dump out the garbage and reuse the trash bag. So I mean, it just puts a lot of things into perspective that there's more than meets the eye.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. What about you?
That was the biggest thing for me was being able to see that. But I think something that really stood out to me was what LTD is doing and what Sarah is doing with this whole can recycling thing.
Yeah.
I had never thought about how challenging it could be to no longer have access to bring cans onto a bus.
Yeah.
To get them recycled, right?
That's, yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, what a really cool project, and I can't wait to see how that unfolds and evolves over time.
Yeah. Not to mention all of the small things that you have to be thinking about, from the safety of the riders to then the sanitary piece to it. And I was just like, man, it's just.
Yeah. I mean, like, one of the things is like, what if the bus comes to a complete stop, right? And it throws things in the air that, aren't, like a bike or one of those bike trailers or, cans or any of those different things can cause injury. And it's something that I don't think a lot of people would have thought of, first thing. Right?
When was the last time you used public transportation?
Honestly, it's been a long time since I've taken a bus. When I was like 15 years old, I ran away from home and I took the Greyhound bus. That was like the last time I took a bus.
Wow.
So, how about you? When was the last time you used public transportation or any sort of bus? Of some sort?
Yeah, I guess I should be more specific because I guess airplanes would count as public transportation too.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But the last time that I rode a bus, man, I can't even say that I've ridden a bus here in Eugene. I think the last time that I rode a bus was in Washington, and it was a very short trip. But every time we go to Mexico, we ride the buses down there.
Sure.
And the buses down there are very different from anything that we have here. So I don't have that experience.
Yeah,
I don't know what people have to deal with, what people have to do, or some of the challenges that they may have to run into with that. But really, having Sarah here, I'm sure she's helping make a lot of change in there because I can totally see the passion.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
awesome.
I mean, it's prevalent. I know our viewers and listeners can feel that.
Yeah.
We can't wait to have her back in the future to kind of catch up with her and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
well, that's all we have for today's episode. So catch us on the next one. This episode of the Eugene Morning Hustle podcast was brought to you by the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce and sponsored by Ivan Torres of Business Block Studios and Brandon Miller Voiceover. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel where you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in the know. If you have any questions, topics, or guests you'd like us to dive into, send us a voice message on the Eugene Chamber Instagram page, and we'll feature you and your question on a future episode. Or shoot us an email at podcast@eugenechamber.com. Till next time, Eugene.